So for our main program today, a husband and wife, neurologists and scientists, Dean and Ayesha Sherzai, are dedicated to educating people on the simple steps it takes to long-term brain health and vitality through their clinical work as directors of the Alzheimer's prevention program at Loma Linda University Health and co-creators of the Healthy Minds Initiative, a nonprofit organization which aims to help empower communities achieve their optimal brain health. Both doctors have tremendous CVs, and rather than to read them to you at this point, I'm going to ask Mariah to make sure we publish that in this week's totem, because I want to provide optimal time for the two of them to share their experience, their inspiration, and their personalities. So with that, please take it away.
Sure. Okay. Hi, everyone. It's wonderful to connect here, all 108 of you. It's beautiful here in California as well, but quite smoky, as you might guess.
Because of the fires.
Because of the fires. We're happy to be here with you guys. I'm Dean Sherzai. I'm a neurologist and a researcher. And
my name is Ayesha Sherzai, and we're both neurologists. My specialty is in vascular neurology, so stroke and vascular dementia. I trained at Loma Linda University in preventive medicine and neurology. I think Dean and I were probably the first people who coined the term preventive neurology, which essentially means, working on prevention of neurological diseases, especially degenerative diseases of the brain. So happy to be here, and thank you so much for the kind introduction.
So we met about 17 years ago, thousands of miles away, in a conversation in the middle of Afghanistan, where we were invited to help rebuild the country. And we started talking about our grandparents, who were two of the most brilliant people we've ever known, and who developed Alzheimer's and died from Alzheimer's. And within a year, we were married, and within 2 years, we were out of the country and in San Diego doing research. UCSD at the time was the #1 neuroscience program in the country. I had just finished prior to that at NIH, as you guys know, National Institutes of Health. And after that, Ayesha went to Loma Linda to do prevention neurology and a fellowship from Columbia University. Our entire life for the last 17 years has been about prevention, and especially cognitive diseases, and especially the biggest one, which is dementia and Alzheimer's. Let me differentiate the two. Dementia is the big category, which is cognitive decline to the extent where it's affecting your daily activities. That's simply that. And it's the biggest tsunami hitting the Western world. And the subcategory of dementia, Alzheimer's, which constitutes 60 to 70% of all dementias, is growing rapidly. We do want to present a little short PowerPoint. We initially thought that, but I think this is going to be quite valuable to see this, and then we'll go from there. So. The reason we're interested in this is because up to now, for millennia, we've avoided the most important organ we have, our brain. You can replace all the other body parts, but you can't replace the brain, because the moment you replace the brain, you've replaced the person. We didn't know much about the brain, so we just ignored it. We even made it cardiocentric. It's in your heart. It's not in your heart. It's in your brain. And the brain is absolutely an amazing organ. And we know so much more about it, and we know that we can do a lot about it. This amazing organ, which is 3% of your body's weight, is 2% of your body's, 3%, 3 pounds, 2% of your body's weight, but it consumes 25% of the body's energy.
At any moment.
At any moment. Mm-hmm. And which means that for 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 years, it's overwhelmed. In fact, it does some of its best work at night, where it actually rebuilds itself, reconstitutes itself. The power rests in the next sentence, which is, it also can make as many as 1 quadrillion connections. That's where it all ends and begins. That's where your control is. So this brain is what we've been working on for the last 15 years on the prevention side. And we know now that we can do a lot to not just avoid diseases, but to maintain profound cognitive capacity and actually grow your cognitive capacity. And there's no gimmicks. By the way, the way we approach it, you don't have to buy a vitamin, mineral, none of that stuff. It's a comprehensive lifestyle, as you'll see. We have examples of people that have lived well into their 80s, 90s, and beyond, and have done amazing work. You know some of the ones, James Goodall, Linus Pauling, and others. The gentleman on the right is Dr. Wareham, who was a cardiothoracic surgeon at Loma Linda, where we trained, we worked. He did open to closed surgeries up to age 95. And at that age, he retired because he wanted to travel. And he did just that. He traveled, he was on TV circuits, he did all of that. And at age 104, fully active, vibrant, and the last month, he declined and he passed away, that's the whole point. There's no way we can avoid death, but the point is to live a vibrant, cognitively active life well into your 90s and beyond, and then whatever happens, happens. But not the pattern that exists in our lives now, which is a progressive decline and chronic diseases starting in our 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond, with high blood pressure, cholesterol, and on and on. And as a consequence, the number one disease that's overtaking healthcare system as we speak is dementia. And Alzheimer's is the number one cause of that, and is growing rapidly. It's the number one cause in Japan of mortality and morbidity. Number one in most of the Western world and Europe, and it's number 3 in US, and it will be number 1 in US within the next decade or so. 6 million Americans suffer from Alzheimer's right now. Every 64 seconds, somebody's being diagnosed with it. But by the way, that's an understatement, because a lot of communities, when a person develops dementia, it's never reported. It's considered just part of aging. And here's the thing, it is not. It's something we can do, we can make a difference in. There are some disparities. As we grow older, after the age of 65, 1 in 10 individuals have dementia, and it doubles every 10 years until at 85, nearly 50% have dementia. Women suffer twice as much. 1 in 6 women develop dementia in their lifetime, and 1 in 11 men. That's actually more than ovarian and breast cancer combined. And in African Americans, the numbers are as much as 100% to 300% higher risk. In Hispanics, about 200% higher risk. And why? The short answer is lifestyle and environment. It's not a genetic thing, as we will talk about that. The cost is absolutely overwhelming. The direct cost of Alzheimer's is $304 billion. Indirect cost, another $240 billion. Compare that to the second costliest disease, which is heart disease, at $120 billion. And third costliest disease, all cancers, at $70 billion. And that number is expected to climb to nearly $3 trillion by 2040 to 2050 if we don't do something about it. Before we go on, we need to dispel some myths. One myth, which now everybody accepts, whereas it was controversial when we first said it, is that Alzheimer's, for the most part, for as much as 80 to 90%, can be prevented. That includes all dementias, but especially Alzheimer's and vascular dementia and others, can be prevented and delayed. And that's important. We don't have to say we can reverse Alzheimer's once it's fully on board. That's unethical. Whoever says things like that or writes books like that, they're playing with people's hopes. But if we can prevent 80 to 90%, if we can push back 5 years, we will have changed healthcare as we know it. And that's good enough. That's important enough. And we must stand for science. Everything else is gimmicks, and as it is personal, it's not about the patient, it's not about the people, it's about the person themselves trying to promulgate their own myth. With the way we've approached it, which is the pharmaceutical approach, we've been failing at 100%. I worked at NIH at experimental therapeutics branch for 2 years, 3 years nearly, and we worked on thousands of mice. Those poor mice, we gave them hundreds of lesions and we cured thousands of mice, but it was never translated to humans because mice are not men. We failed over and over and over again. But the answer was right in front of us, and the answer is not in genetics either. We now know that there are about 30 genes involved in Alzheimer's, but only 3% of Alzheimer's is driven by the kinds of genes that if you have those genes, you'll get the disease no matter what. Those are presenilin 1, presenilin 2, and APP. Those constitute 3 to 4% of all Alzheimer's. But the rest of the 90 to 95% or higher are polygenetic, which means that if you have those genes, they just simply increase your risk. And in many ways, they're a lifestyle risk. The second highest one is ApoE4. And ApoE4 is a gene that codes a protein that actually what it does is it affects your body's ability to process lipids and fats. So if you have ApoE4, it does a poor job. If you have ApoE2, it does a good job. So you see, it's a lifestyle gene in many ways. And ApoE4 does increase your risk significantly, but it doesn't mean that if you have that gene, you're going to get the disease. It's just a risk gene. So genetics are only connected to Alzheimer's and many of the dementias as they pertain to risk. And that's basically it. So we've been talking about prevention being the new treatment. And now for the last 3 years, all the other institutions such as Alzheimer's Association and AARP and others have also joined on board. So it's critical that we take this battle on, and the battle is not around even us. We are pretty good at what we do, but it's not about us. It shouldn't be about the heroic doctor. It shouldn't be about the heroic medicine, or even the one blueberry, the blueberries or kale or some vitamins. It's about comprehensive lifestyle at the community level. That's why we're actually talking to communities. That's why our entire life's purpose is around our non-for-profit, which aims to increase awareness about lifestyle in communities. So prevention is the new treatment and the new cure. The pathways to Alzheimer's and most dementias is fourfold: inflammation, oxidation, lipid dysregulation, and sugar or glucose or energy dysregulation. You can come to Alzheimer's from different paths. If you have diabetes that's uncontrolled, that's going to push you towards Alzheimer's. If you have high cholesterol that's uncontrolled, that's going to push you. And when we wrote the book and we've done 50 publications, there are hundreds of papers that show those research papers. We don't have time to go over each of those now, but those are basically different pathways. Or inflammation, for example, people who have chronic traumatic brain injury, their path to dementia is inflammation mostly. So it's a combination of those. So how do you affect those 4 pathways? Very simply, through nutrition, exercise, stress management, sleep, but restorative sleep, not just being knocked out, and mental activity. Those 5 are critical. And with that, we came with this cute acronym, self-serving a bit. We're neurologists or neuro. N is for nutrition, E is for exercise, U is for unwind, which is about good and bad stress. Yes, it's critical to know about good stress because that's probably the most important thing. R is for restorative sleep, which is not about just being knocked out with pills, but getting a restorative sleep for 8 hours a night, or 7 to 8 hours. And optimize, one of the most important, was continuous cognitive challenge throughout life. That's critical. That's important. So these 5 factors are central to pushing back dementia and Alzheimer's. And they come from this happens in your home, this happens at your work, this happens in these gatherings, the one you're in right now, and it happens in communities. And that's what our focus has been. With that, I'm going to pass on how neuro takes place to my better half, as you will see soon, Ayesha, who's a neurologist, nutritionist, scientist, and also a cook. Because while she was at Columbia doing stroke research and stroke work, at night she would learn how to cook, because if you don't teach people what healthy eating is and making it easy and tasty, all you're doing is throwing information at people and without it ever sticking. So I'll pass on to Ayesha.
I'll try my best not to talk to you guys about food all day long, because as a chef and as someone who does nutrition research, I could go on and on forever, but I'll be respectful of the time. Nutrition, or the food that we eat, is incredibly important. And how can it not be? It's something that we put in our body 3 or 4 times a day, and it literally determines the building blocks of the brain. As a matter of fact, there have been a lot of studies that have been done on different foods and different dietary patterns. We try not to focus in too much on vitamins and particular foods, because that's a very reductionist approach. And from some of the fantastic work that have been done from different universities, and I'm proud to be a part of Columbia University's nutrition research on Mediterranean diet and the MIND diet, we now know that dietary patterns are important. And the foods that stand out in any dietary pattern, whether it's Mediterranean or MIND or DASH, these are the different acronyms for different dietary patterns, it's the plants. So it's the greens and the beans and the blueberries, the nuts and the seeds, and reduction of processed foods, whether it's trans fats or saturated fats. And, when it comes to fats, specifically saturated fats seem to be quite harmful because they are associated with inflammation in the brain and a condition called insulin resistance, which essentially does not allow brain cells to use glucose as a source of energy. And you don't necessarily have to have a diagnosis of diabetes or insulin resistance, at its maximal form. Even people who have abnormal glucose levels, despite the fact that they're normal and they don't have a diagnosis of diabetes, tend to have lower cognitive status. So, like Dean said earlier, dementia, or specifically Alzheimer's disease, is not a diagnosis that starts at some point. It's actually a journey, and cognitive decline starts very early in life. So the more we pay attention to the foods that we eat, the better. And the other thing that we found in nutrition research is that, supplements or specific nutrients does not relieve us from any damage in the brain. So it's best derived from foods. So eating a wholesome diet that are predominantly plant-based seem to be helpful more than anything else.
And checking your levels to make sure you don't have deficiencies, because it's only then that you should actually, first of all, find out why you have low levels. That's one. And second of all, then supplement. So food is your medicine.
Food is definitely the medicine. So, vitamins like vitamin D and vitamin B12 and omega-3 fats are best derived from foods rather than pill forms. As far as exercise is concerned, I don't think I need to spend a lot of time telling you all how important it is. We all know that exercise is incredibly important for cardiovascular health, but it is especially important for brain health. And from the studies that we have, we now know that people who engage in a regimented exercise program, they actually have bigger brains, and specifically parts of the brain that are responsible for encoding memory. The hippocampus is one part. They're really small, and we have a pair of them on each side. They actually grow with a regimented exercise program, both aerobic exercise and strength training. And now we also know that sedentary behavior nullifies the benefit of any exercise that you do. So say, for example, we exercise for 20 or 30 minutes in the morning, but then we sit down for about 4 or 5 hours behind our desk and don't get up. Gone. That exercise effect is gone. So standing up every hour, stretching, walking for 2 to 3 minutes around your desk in your house, and especially during this pandemic where we're all homebound, it's incredibly important. And having an environment around our homes where we're pushed to exercise is very helpful. The other interesting thing that we found in exercise over the year is that leg strength is associated with the size of our brain. And that's incredibly intriguing. But if you think about it, when we exercise our legs, they're the biggest pumps in our body. So we have better cerebral blood flow when we exercise our legs. And also we have the biggest muscles in our legs, which release very important hormones, growth hormones, specifically called the brain-derived neurotrophic factor. They essentially allow for the brain to make those connections that Dean was talking about earlier. So exercise is incredibly important. The goal is to exercise 20 to 30 minutes a day, 4 to 5 days a week. And then stress, or the unwind portion. Now, all stress is not bad. There is such a thing as good stress and bad stress. And our goal should be to increase our good stress. And good stress is things like going to school, taking a class, learning a new language, learning a new musical instrument, having a conversation in front of Seattle Rotary Club, engaging with other individuals, putting yourself in situations where you have good stress, the type of stress that is under your control, that is connected to your mission and your vision in life. That is what sets people apart from others who don't have good stress. The brain actually shrinks when you don't have good stress. Bad stress is the type of stress that you don't have any control over. And it's the one that doesn't have any timeline, and it's not really connected to your purpose. Mm-hmm. And that literally causes damage to brain cells, the hippocampal cells. It impairs our motivation. It impairs our learning. And it causes the secretion of hormones like adrenaline and cortisol that damage brain, blood vessels, and the cells themselves too. Sleep, incredibly important. There was not much emphasis on sleep. And us as doctors, we used to take pride in sleeping only 3 or 4 hours a day and being quote unquote normal the next day. Nobody's normal after that much sleep, by the way. And now we know that sleep is a very important time during the day where our brain consolidates memory and cleanses itself. We have these brain cells that are essentially the janitor cells, and they get activated when we go through this deep stages of sleep. And they go in and they collect the debris and clean our brain. And it makes the more space for more information to come in and get processed the next day. And addressing sleep diseases or sleep disorders like sleep apnea or restless leg syndrome is incredibly important because they are associated with a higher risk of Alzheimer's disease. In one series, people who had untreated sleep apnea had a 70% higher risk of developing Alzheimer's disease. And it makes sense. You don't get enough sleep, your brain doesn't get cleansed, your memories are not consolidated, and the lack of oxygen going into the brain associated with sleep apnea actually damages brain structures. And the last one is Optimize, which is Dean's main focus of research and his passion.
Optimize has to do with that good stress. Remember that each neuron, we have 87 billion neurons, and it's the number of neurons is not as important as the connections between them. And that is important because each neuron can make a couple of connections or as many as 30,000 connections. The number of those connections are all dependent on what you do, the nutrition, the exercise, but especially mental activity. When you challenge the brain around your purpose, around complexity that pushes you around that purpose, each neuron makes those thousands of connections. That's profound amount of protection against any kind of damage. By that I mean, Sudoku and crosswords, those are great, those are fine. I'll probably get sued by a Sudoku company at some time because I keep putting it down. But it's more complex behaviors. When you learn a new musical instrument, when you learn a new language, when you learn how to dance, when you run a group, when you volunteer, when you run a company, these are play cards with friends. These are multi-dimensional activities that challenge all of your brain, not just one center. And they are purpose-driven because they're around your purpose. So there's a joy and happiness and motivation in it. That's the highest protection. In fact, studies have shown people who were very mentally active and then they retired and they didn't do anything for just 2 years. Guess what happened? They had the highest decline in cognition because that brain was used to being challenged. And when you take away the challenge, those millions of connections or billions of connections withdraw. So keep your brain challenged. So as you can see, at the center of all this is 5 things that have nothing to do with any vitamins, brain hacking, any gimmick. It all has to do with what you do in your home. But these are not small things. This is profound protection against dementia, but more importantly, maintaining cognitive health by eating more greens, beans, less fat, saturated fat, less sugar and processed foods. You actually, with every meal, give the brain the environment to build itself. By exercising, you're giving it growth hormone, BDNF, and the blood supply that it needs and oxygen. By stress, by good stress, you actually push it to make the connections. With sleep, you give it 8 hours. I call it the sleep spa.
Yeah.
Forget about any other kind of spa. Make your bedroom the spa. That's where your brain actually cleanses itself for 8 hours. If we have an 8-hour talk on sleep, those 8 hours, if not done well, every night you can damage your brain. And then lastly, mental activity, challenging mental activity, that's where you grow the brain. So that's why focusing on these kind of 5 factors, which are easily applied in your own home, which are easily applied in communities, is critical. What we're doing here at Beach Cities, which is the largest brain health initiative in the world.
In Southern California.
Sorry, we're the lead scientists in Southern California. We're also expanding it to Sedona and other communities out of our own funds through the healthymindsinitiative.org to expand this capacity to all communities. And we're so glad to be part of the Seattle or Northwest community with Connexin right now.
Yeah, so we started a challenge. Let me just kind of get rid of this slides, but we're very happy that we have been a part of the Northwest Connection Challenge, which is a 30-day challenge for individuals to get together. There's a Facebook group and we connect with them and we talk about the importance of connectivity, challenging one's minds, and eating a plant-based diet. So we're sharing recipes and we're asking everyone to partake in this fabulous community of people who are willing to look at the importance of challenge and changing their diet slowly and gradually towards better brain health. And that's basically it.
That's it. Well,
I see a lot of questions. So let us know whether we need to take the questions or thank you.
I don't think we've ever done a 20-minute talk.
That was
challenging.
Yeah, that was
You
challenging.
guys did great, and Ken's going to jump in and moderate the Q&A. And yes, there's plenty to choose from. So Ken, please take it away.
Did you say that's basically it? That's awesome. You breath at the beginning and you exhaled at the end. Now, I personally have some stress going on because I've never seen this many questions. So we got like 15 minutes. So let's hop into these. What do you think about the value of POSIT? If I'm saying that correct, POSIT Science Brain HQ.
Oh, I see. So Brain HQ is a game, essentially.
Or it's an
online,
app.
right?
Yeah. I can't talk about, well, I can, but I don't want to. But I would say do real life activities for multiple reasons. It's much more challenging to the brain. It's much more acceptable to the brain. It's much more conducive to connections within the brain. Do real life activities. It's so much more beneficial, especially if the activities involve other people. And even if it's one other person, it doesn't have to be in person. This right here is mental activity, challenging mental activity. So my thing would be, yeah, I'm not against technology at all. I'm actually very pro technology, but the technology we have now is contrived. Whether it's Brain HQ or some other thing, real life activities are exponentially more powerful. The research we're doing in Beach Cities has to do with real life activities. So that's my answer to that.
Okay, very good. All right, next question. What are the characteristics of Alzheimer's that distinguish it from other forms of dementia? What percentage of the population have the 3% of the gene that makes Alzheimer's inevitable? You're reading this too, that's funny.
Yeah, so what they call Alzheimer's is a type of dementia. It's distinguished pathologically at its later stages by amyloid and tau proteins that accumulate. In other diseases like Lewy body disease and others, like Robin Williams had Lewy body disease and frontotemporal, other proteins accumulate. It's either synucleinopathy and others. That's not important. Clinically, how it's distinct is in Alzheimer's, you always see short-term memory being affected disproportionate to long-term memory, especially early on. Later on, everything's affected. In fact, later on, all dementias start looking the same because all of the brain is affected. But early on, short-term memory is disproportionately affected to long-term. So a lot of my patients come to me, especially men, say, oh, I'm fine. I can remember 50 years back. It's just the breakfast I forgot. That's the problem. Now, don't be scared. We all have some of that. That doesn't mean that's Alzheimer's. Short-term memory for all of us is affected more than. But when it's disproportionately affected, that's a sign that maybe that might be of Alzheimer's type.
I think I've had some breakfast that I'd like to forget, but that's probably different. If you ever had a mild stroke, would that increase? Let me read this again. Apparently my difficulty is not remembering it, it's just remembering the words. If you ever had a mild stroke, would that increase your likelihood of dementia or Alzheimer's?
Yes, it would. When people have stroke, it means that some of the arteries in the brain that supply oxygen and nutrition have been damaged. And stroke usually occurs when the damage is too much and the brain kind of stops healing itself, essentially. So yes, people who have had a mild stroke or even silent strokes. So there are strokes where people don't have a manifestation of the symptoms, but they're tiny and there are a lot of them in the brain. And over time, that can actually end up with vascular dementia. However, it's a modifiable risk factor. So there's a lot that one can do to modify their risks with everything that we just talked about.
The causes are either atrial fibrillation, which can be treated, or high blood pressure, or cholesterol, or diabetes. All those things are modifiable and changeable. And a lot of times it's too late. It's critical to know ahead of time, and then you get rid of that risk.
Okay. All right. I think it's not ironic that the president of our club is asking the next question. What is positive stress?
Yes, good stress.
The president is going through positive stress. So positive stress.
That's why I set it up the way I did.
Yeah. So this is important. Remember, this brain, 3 pounds, is so important, and you sacrifice so much for this 3 pound. Our birth is different from other animals. We're the only animal that doesn't walk for 9 months because the brain has to grow. After birth, we don't walk. Deers, as soon as they're born, they start running. We don't. That's a sacrifice for the brain. We sleep 8 hours, which means you were knocked out. We were actually studying sleep earlier for a research project. We're paralyzed for 8 hours. That's not, why would that have happened? Because that brain that's so energy hungry, 25% of your body's weight, needs rest, needs restoration. But also, so why do we need this brain then? Because its number one function is information gathering. And if you're not giving it information, if you're not giving it life-saving or life purpose-driven information, it doesn't need to use all that information. You know what it does? It collapses. It loses those connections. So one of the most important things you can do as you get older is continuing challenging your brain around your purpose.
Absolutely.
And by challenge, I mean, let's take musical instruments. Ayesha is an amazing singer, professional. I have no talents. I've played guitar. I've played guitar for 30 years. The joke I say is I've played Stairway to Heaven for 30 years. I'm still on the 4th staircase. So let's say you learn guitar and it's 4 chords. But by the way, 70% of 60s songs are 4 chords.
Yeah, Beatles are
4 chords. So after a while it becomes repetitive. That's not challenge. That's complex, which is important, but it's not challenge. Then move yourself to the next level. 5 chords, new songs. It's only when you keep pushing yourself that those neurons want to make new connections. You see the logic in this. There's no need to spend money on us. Well, I don't know, on our community, non-for-profits maybe, but it doesn't need nothing. It has to do with real life complex behaviors that connects the brain.
And when you are engaged in positive stress, you actually create so much resilience in the brain that even if you have a small stroke, or even if you have the pathology of Alzheimer's disease, it never manifests. And there have been studies that show that people may have had the pathology because they built so much connectivity, they never really showed any symptoms of the disease, which is incredible.
In 2008, I did a paper, a very complex paper, a review paper with Dr. Dilip Jeste, the head of NIMH. It's called Successful Cognitive Aging. And what we found was the number of connectivity protected you against almost all cognitive diseases of aging, and it had to do with complexity of behavior.
Sorry, that was a long answer, but that's such an important perspective.
Well, I think it's fine. I don't think you should apologize. This is not the easiest conversation in the world either. Is it true that accentuating new ideas as well as nostalgic ones are both beneficial in maintaining brain health?
Absolutely, accentuating new ideas. So there's a term called idea density, which Dean and I think is a great name for a band. And people who have high idea density, which essentially means that creativity, coming up with new thoughts, challenging your mind with new ideas, and also with nostalgia, they're incredibly beneficial. Why? Again, because of building more cognitive resilience and reserve.
Good, very good. All right, does melatonin or moon drops contribute to restorative sleep if not used regularly?
We're not against melatonin or moon drops or pills, but I think one should aim for a restorative sleep without the need of any crutches or medication.
We're not against any medicine. In fact, we think medicine is amazing, but what we've made a mistake in medical field is that we have mistaken medication for short term, as in once you are on a medicine, you're supposed to be on it forever. Medicine can serve as a bridge, but you can actually change outcomes through behavior change and lifestyle. So yes, use the medicine for short term, but there are so many other things you can do, such as sleep hygiene and cognitive behavioral therapy to establish really brilliant sleep, restorative sleep. Why is that important? There are certain medications, actually all medications, that affect the levels of depth of sleep. When you sleep, you go through several phases, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, and REM sleep. And if you don't get to phase 3 and 4 and REM at least 4 times a night, your memory is affected, your restoration is affected, meaning amyloid and inflammation builds up. Yes, some medicine can knock you out. Even alcohol can knock you out, but they all affect the depth of sleep. So use it short term, but you should have a plan long term to create restorative sleep without medicine.
Okay, all right, so back to music that you were mentioning a minute ago. Have you heard about music and singing along to favorite songs as helping with dementia? we have a district Rotary project where Rotarians go into retirement homes and lead sing-alongs with the residents there. Is this something that's on your radar? I presume it is.
Absolutely. Music is incredible because it's one of those activities that activate multiple domains of cognition. You activate your memory, your emotional centers, your decision-making, your judgment, your processing. And it's, and they've done studies on functional MRI, which is, an MRI where you see the brain live. And when somebody's either listening to music or partaking in any musical activity, the brain is on fire. You have multiple areas lighting up, as opposed to, say, for example, doing crossword puzzle, which is just language, or Sudoku, which is just calculation. So it's a very complex activity. It's incredibly good, both for prevention of Alzheimer's disease, but also for maintaining cognitive resilience once somebody already has mild cognitive impairment or early dementia.
But the key is here to challenge yourself. If you keep doing the same song, like row, row, row your boat, I don't know, I don't think you guys will be doing that. But if you're doing the same song over and over again, you're not going to be challenging yourself.
Right.
So the challenge part is important just as much.
Okay. We've got about 3 minutes left. So I've heard diet drinks and sugar substitutes can cause memory loss and confusion.
There's not a lot of strong evidence for diet drinks and sugar substitute. There's a lot of evidence for saturated fats, which come from, processed foods and say, for example, processed meats and dairy. But as far as diet drinks and sugar substitutes are concerned, most of them come from animal studies. And those poor mice, they're given a truckload of whatever compound they're testing. And in real life, that doesn't happen. So, in small quantities, we don't have evidence of them being that harmful. I could go on, but that's basically the
short version. We go by data. The data is not strong.
Yeah.
The data is not strong. The data is strong for sugar. Because sugar is actually not real. It's artificial. I know that there's a lot of hoopla about aspartame, but the data is very weak so far. So for example, if you're eating oranges, that's great. But if you're drinking a lot of orange juice, that's not good because you've just taken the fiber, which is phenomenally important. By the way, fiber. And then you're just giving the sugar back to people. Sugar and excessive sugar affects insulin resistance. It affects cellular function. So we're not the kind that says fat is only bad. No, fat and sugar and processed foods are both bad. And
I think this is very important because I hear a lot of people saying, oh, well, diet sugars or sugar substitutes are not great. So I'm going to go with natural sugar. So they start eating honey and maple syrup and sugar, which is actually harmful. So if somebody is pre-diabetic, for example, or if they have difficulty with their glucose regulation, it might be better to choose for artificial sugars rather than going for natural sugars.
And by the way, what we're pushing is not about lack of food, lack of taste. What is the term you use? Deprivation. It's not about deprivation. You can get sweetness. For example, Ayesha is a cook, so she creates all these cakes and things of that nature. For sweetness, she uses things like date powder. Why is that different?
Date sugar.
Date powder. Because the sugar is bound to the fiber. The sugar itself is not bad. It's the pace at which the sugar is released. When there's too much sugar released too fast, the cell actually, it's very complex, but the short of it is the cell has to do something to the insulin receptors. So it's the slow pace of release that's important.
Okay, I'm going to put some positive stress on you because you got 45 seconds to answer the next question. 45, counting.
All right.
A period of chronic bad stress permanently damaged the brain. Can you repair our brains after periods of chronic stress, bad stress, or insomnia?
Absolutely. The brain is very susceptible.
I'm kidding. Yes.
The brain is very susceptible, but at the same time, very resilient. And if you give it the right environment, it will grow and thrive.
Wow. I got
that was fast.
I got like 15 seconds on my sleeve. What do I do with that, Jeff? All right. Hey, thank you so much, Dean and Ayesha. Fantastic. I've never seen this many questions ever. And for all those people that ask questions, I'm sorry again for not getting to them, but I did my very best. So thank you very much for being here today. We really appreciate it.
Yes,
everyone was on the edge of their seats today. Show your appreciation in the chat field. And if you can stay to the end of the hour, that would be appreciated. But thank you so much.
That's very kind of you. Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.